Hello, I'm Isaac Keith Martinez, and welcome to Isaac's Haunted Beard. Halloween's coming up. Every Halloween, I watch horror movies every day of the month to celebrate the upcoming horror holiday that is Halloween. And one of my traditions is to watch horror movies that take place on Halloween, like Halloween, the John Carpenter film and the Rob Zombie remake, and Trick or Treat, which includes Trick or Treat with Mark Price, and Trick or Treat, which is the horror anthology. And I also like to watch House of a Thousand Corpses. So, I'm going to talk to you today about my favorite Rob Zombie film, House of a Thousand Corpses. Now, I am aware that the most popular Rob Zombie film in his filmography is the sequel, The Devil's Rejects, which I love. But I love this movie because, to me, House of a Thousand Corpses feels like the movie you'd make if you weren't sure if you'd ever get a chance to make another movie. Because this is his debut film. I remember when I first heard that Rob Zombie had made a film, I couldn't wait to see it. And I had to wait to see it because they weren't going to release it. Or at least, they weren't going to release it yet. Because this movie was in limbo for a while, where the studio that gave Rob Zombie the money to make the movie looked at it and went, we can't release this, and they shelved it. And then eventually it got picked up by Lionsgate. It was released, I think, a year or two later. By then, when you have to wait that long to see a movie, your anticipation levels are so high that you're just super duper excited. And when you're that excited, usually you get let down. But it was so incredible to finally see it and to not be let down. At least I wasn't let down. And I have seen this movie so many times since then, and it still doesn't let me down. It never gets old, because The House of a Thousand Corpses feels like a celebration of horror. It feels like a horror movie mixtape. It feels like there's pieces of other movies in this movie. And I don't mean that in any way as a dig to Rob Zombie, like he's a thief. I think of him as someone who has spent his entire life absorbing so much horror cinema, and when he finally had a chance to tell his story, his brain just exploded onto the screen with pieces of all these different movies he's filled his head up with over the years. It really feels like just a firecracker explosion of horror. One of the things I want to point out about this movie versus its sequel, The Devil's Rejects, is that The Devil's Rejects is a very realistic film, and House of a Thousand Corpses is more surreal, it's more cartoony, it's more like a music video. I have this personal feeling about that aesthetic versus the realistic aesthetic of The Devil's Rejects, and I really like that the two films are different, because I don't necessarily believe that this is the reason why Rob Zombie made the two films differently, but this is just the way I've made it make sense to me. Is the Firefly family live in their own little personal private bubble on their ranch where there is no law. They just commit these atrocious crimes and they do whatever they want, and they live in their own personal fantasy nightmare. And I feel like that chaotic world that they've created is captured in House of a Thousand Corpses. I think House of a Thousand Corpses looks the way it feels to be the Firefly clan living on that, compound. But with the second film, when they had to escape and go on the run, suddenly they're no longer in that world anymore. They're in the real world. They're on the road, and all of a sudden they don't have the safety of their own little castle, their kingdom of horror. So all of a sudden everything looks more realistic. And I like the fantasy world. I mean, that's where I want to live. I want to live in the fantasy world. I want to live in the world of like weirdo, you know, crazy kook bananas. I love that whole look, that whole feel, and that whole vibe. And that's why I love House of a Thousand Corpses. And House of a Thousand Corpses is definitely a horror film. The Devil's Rejects is a horror film too, at least as far as I'm concerned. But I know that there are some people who would even argue, no, it's just a violent road picture. I guess if you want it to be, but even if I were to say yes, it is, you can't say that about House. House is definitely a bona fide, genuine horror film. And it takes place on Halloween Eve and Halloween, the first night when the young kids, the young adults, make their way to the Firefly house. It is the day before Halloween. And of course, as we know, they don't leave that house. And their torment carries over to the next day, which is Halloween. So, this movie qualifies as a movie you can watch on Halloween or the month of October to celebrate the month of Halloween that takes place on Halloween. And I have this on Blu-ray, but I also have it on DVD. And, you know, sometimes when you buy a movie on DVD and then you upgrade later to Blu-ray, you get rid of the DVD because you only have so much shelf space. But I will keep a DVD if I prefer the packaging of the DVD over the Blu-ray. I don't think this is very special. It's very basic, you know. I guess there's a picture inside, whatever. But this, you can't top this. You open it. Wow. And then you open it again. Holy moly. You take the disc out. There's Captain Spaulding. Terrific. And speaking of packaging, I just want to give a shout out to the CD. Yes, the soundtrack to House of a Thousand Corpses also has terrific packaging. Because you open it, look at that. Look at that. You open it again. My goodness. Take the CD out. Take this again! And the book to the CD is glued to the inside of the case. You turn the pages and it's got pictures of all the different members of the Firefly clan. And it has their rap sheets and what their name, their alias, their crime, their age, their hair. You know, Karen Black is terrific as Mother Firefly. In the second film, she's played by Leslie Easterbrook, who you may know from the Police Academy films. Karen Black, I guess, didn't agree on how much money she wanted for the movie, so she didn't return. And Leslie Easterbrook's okay. She's good, I guess. But what I don't like about Leslie Easterbrook is her teeth. In the second film, her teeth is like perfect. Like she's been to the dentist. And Karen Black's teeth are just jacked up. They look like exactly how they're supposed to look. So like, maybe you may regard it as an unusual thing. But it's a good little detail that I think is important. There's Tiny. This is the same actor, he's no longer alive actually, who plays the giant in Big Fish, the Tim Burton film. Another actor who's in this movie that's no longer with us is the grandpa. So, my favorite scene in House of a Thousand Corpses is the scene where Otis murders the police officers. And I think it is, you know, it's right in the middle of this otherwise wild, cartoonish, surreal film. And the lead up to that scene is actually minus sound, at least the sound of what's actually going on. It's music playing. It's the Slim Whitman song, and then that song plays for the entirety of the song, and then when it's finished, and the camera is just pulling back further and further up into the sky, and you see Otis pointing the gun at the police officer, and it's just quiet. It's just dead silence. And when he shoots the gun, I mean, up until the moment that he shoots the gun, even if you, I'll just speak for myself, even though I've seen the movie so many times, there's something about just waiting for that gun to go off that makes you feel like you're on pins and needles, like you're holding your breath waiting for it to happen. And I think a less patient filmmaker, or someone who's definitely not an artist, wouldn't have done that, or at least they would have had the gunshot happen much sooner. But he really does have the patience. And can you imagine, like, talk about horror. What is a horror film? It's to be horrified. I've seen so many horror movies where killers just kill. The moment you see the killer, they kill you. If you don't think of it as a movie, you think of it as real life, the idea of being killed, you don't have time to be horrified. The only person who's horrified is the audience. The person in the film who's being killed, they don't have time to be horrified. It's just, there's a killer dead. But this cop, he's standing there with his gun pointed at him, and he's not being shot immediately, so he's got time to just sit there helpless and realize, I'm going to die, and there's nothing I can do about this. And that is one of the scariest things I can think of. Just knowing you're going to go, you have no choice, there's nothing you can do to get out of it, you just don't know when it's going to happen, and you just got to live with it until you can't live literally no more. House of a Thousand Corpses is a masterpiece. It has wonderful rewatchability. It's very colorful. It's got so much wonderful quotes. It's got a great ensemble cast, and it has given us new iconic characters in Captain Spaulding and I would say Otis as well. But as far as marketability is concerned, I think there's a lot of Captain Spaulding merchandise, like toys and T-shirts and stuff. So he's definitely a part of the horror famous icon group. Like you got your Jasons and Freddys. He's up there with them in that there's a lot of Captain Spaulding cosplay and toys, and his image is famous. It's recognizable immediately. And Sid Haig is just amazing, and I feel like Rob Zombie using Sid Haig in that movie is similar to Quentin Tarantino using actors that he loved in the 70s and the 80s and bringing them back and giving them, like John Travolta had a second chance at his career because of Pulp Fiction, strangely enough, Sid Haig had worked before House of a Thousand Corpses. In fact, it was with Quentin Tarantino. He's in Jackie Brown. He plays the judge, and he's in it very briefly. But it was House of a Thousand Corpses that really brought Sid back. Now, if you don't watch horror, which I know you do, you obviously do, you'd go, well, really, how back is he? Because I don't see him and stuff. Well, you know what? He's a horror guy, and he's always been a low-budget guy, and that's kind of where he's remained. He's still in direct-to-video, low-budget movies. But hey, that's a career. I wish I had that career. I would love to trade places with him. I would love to be in 10 million low-budget, Z-grade horror films. That sounds like a wonderful life to me. I'd be super proud. And I know he makes a lot of people happy. I know that when he's at conventions, he gets a lot of long lines and autographs and pictures and so forth. So he's a legend, and I want to say thank you, Rob Zombie. Thank you, Sid Haig. Thank you, Bill Moseley. Thank you, Sherry Moon Zombie. Thank you, the late Karen Black. Thank you, everybody involved with House of a Thousand Corpses, including Chris Hardwick and Rainn Wilson. Thank you, all of you guys. And if you're a fan of Rob Zombie and House of a Thousand Corpses, thank you. If you ever show it to someone and they've never seen it before, thank you. You're spreading the good word. So, happy Halloween, and I hope that if you haven't already, please subscribe to Isaac's Haunted Beard on YouTube, and follow Isaac's Haunted Beard on Twitter at Isaac'sHauntedB. Bye-bye.